Welcome back to Tech Stack for all you tech enthusiasts. Now, let's discuss API integration. In this video, we will focus specifically on Get APIs. Whenever we talk about any front-end application, whether it's Angular, React, or any other UI-based framework, APIs play a critical role. A front-end application is mainly responsible for the user interface, and for data, it relies on APIs. APIs allow the UI to communicate with the backend, fetch data, and display it to the user. Now, let's understand how an API works with the help of a diagram. No matter what kind of application we're building, whether it's an e-commerce system, employee management, or a hospital application, data is always involved. It doesn't matter if it's a mobile app, a web app, or even a desktop application. In every case, we have to work with data. And where do we store this data? We store it in a database. Now, let's talk about the front end and the back end. On the front end, we use frameworks like Angular or React to build the user interface. On the back end, we build server-side applications using technologies like .NET, Python, Java, or PHP. These back-end technologies are used to create APIs, which the front-end applications use to communicate with the database. From a front-end application, we cannot connect directly to the database. So, we need a medium to connect the front end with the database. That's where APIs come in. These APIs are developed using technologies like .NET, Java, or Python. An API is essentially a URL that we call from the front-end application. For example, in an e-commerce application, when we need to load products, we hit a product API. Whatever response the API returns, we capture that data and use it to create a dynamic user interface. From the web application, we send a request to the API. The API then processes that request and communicates with the database. The database sends the requested data back to the API. The API then sends that data back to the web application. This is how a web application works, using APIs to communicate with the backend and database. In Angular, we make API calls using HttpClient. The fetch method is common in plain JavaScript, but in Angular, HttpClient is the standard for API integration. This library comes built in with Angular, so we don't need to install any extra packages. Whenever we create a new Angular project, HttpClient is already available by default. APIs typically have 5 main methods: get, post, put, delete, and patch. The get method is used to retrieve records or data from the server. The post method is used to create new records on the server. The put method is used to update an existing record on the server. The delete method is used to remove a record from the server. The patch method is used to make partial updates to an existing record on the server. Now, let's start implementing API integration in our Angular application. Open the integrated terminal in the Pages folder and create a new component called Get API. Now, open approutes.ts and add a route for the Get API component. Open app HTML and add a link for the Get API component in the navigation bar. Open a terminal in your project folder and run the command ngserve. This will compile your Angular application and start a local development server. Once it's running, you can open your browser and navigate to localhost 4200 to see your application in action. As you can see, the Get API component is working correctly. Before moving ahead, as you know, Angular recently released Angular 21. We are covering Angular 21 from scratch, So if you're a beginner or intermediate, this series will be highly recommended for you. We have also provided the Angular 21 playlist in the description for easy access. To start API integration in Angular, open the appconfig.ts file. In the appconfig.ts file, you'll see the providers array. The first thing we need to do is add provide HttpClient to this array. Before Angular 17, we used to add it in the app module, but that approach is now deprecated. Now, in the getAPI component, we'll add the API call integration. To test with a free API, we'll use JSONPlaceholder. Scroll down to the bottom and open the Todos API. This is the URL we'll use for our API call. These are mock APIs meant for testing. They don't actually update or change any data. If you access this URL, you'll get a predefined set of data that we can use in our application. Now, let's integrate this API. First, we'll use the ngOnInit Lifecycle event to make the API call when the component initializes. Don't forget to add implements on init to the component class so we can use the ngOnInit lifecycle hook. We've also covered lifecycle events in detail. You can check out that video. Link is in the description. Next, add a constructor to the component class. Inside the constructor, create an instance of HttpClient so we can use it to make API calls. Now, create a function called getTodos that will handle fetching data from the API. Next, call the API using this .http that get inside the function to fetch the data. The get function requires the API URL as a string parameter. Copy the API URL from JSONPlaceholder and paste it as the parameter in the get function. We called the API, but now we need to capture the data. To do this, we use the subscribe function, which lets us handle the response from the API. The API call returns an observable. Whenever something returns an observable in Angular, we need to subscribe to it in order to access the data. Once we subscribe, we receive the response in a variable, which we can call result. This API returns an array of objects, so we need a variable to store this data. We'll hold the response in that variable, so we can use it in our component. Create a variable called ToDoList and initialize it as an empty array to store the API data. We take the response from the API, which we called result, and assign it to our ToDoList variable. This way, the data from the API is stored in the component and can be used to display items in the user interface. Now, call the getTodos function inside ngOnInit so the API data is fetched automatically when the component initializes. For testing, you can add a debugger inside the subscribe function to pause execution and inspect the API response in the browser. As you can see, the result contains 200 items, and we store all of them in the to-do list array. Now, Let's display the data in a table so we can see all the items from the to-do list array. Create a row container and inside it, add a column that takes up 8 parts of the width. Next, add a table inside the column to display the data from the to-do list array. Inside the table, add a T-head section with a TR for the table headers. Now, create 4 columns in the table header: user ID, ID, title, and completed. To improve the table's appearance, add the Bootstrap table class. Next, add a T-body section in the table. Inside the T-body, we'll iterate over the to-do list array using angulars for control flow to display each item as a row. Now, add 4 TD cells inside each row to display the values for user ID, ID, title, and completed. We display each value inside the table cells using interpolation, so the data from to-do list appears dynamically. Copy the field names from the API response and use them inside the table cells with interpolation to show the actual data. As you can see, the data is now displaying perfectly in the table. This completes our Get API integration. In the next video, we'll cover services, and after that, we'll explore post, put, and delete APIs. If you're passionate about learning new technologies, make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Tech Stack, and keep learning new skills. Thank you. And remember, consistency is the key to success.